The first thing I saw on the morning of October 17, 1997, was a yellow backhoe taking a bite out of the stone wall my husband Cal had built with his own hands. The second thing I saw was Clay Barlow, standing beside that machine in a pressed blue shirt and polished boots, holding a paper cup of coffee like he was watching a little league game instead of tearing apart my front yard. And the third thing I heard was him calling across the dust, "Morning, Diane. You ought to thank me. I am finally fixing this mess for you." Now, I had been called plenty of things in my life, mostly by people who did not know me well enough to know better, but nobody had ever looked me in the face while destroying my property and expected gratitude. I was 53 years old, widowed, tired in ways sleep could not fix, and I had spent the last 3 years learning that a quiet woman living alone makes certain men think she is an empty chair waiting for them to sit in. Clay Barlow had made that mistake. He just had not realized it yet. My name is Diane Mercer, and back in 1997 I lived on 34 acres outside a little place called Cedar Ridge, Virginia, where the mountains rolled soft and green through most of the year, and the whole county smelled like wet leaves after rain. My husband Cal and I bought that land in 1976, when we were young enough to think 34 acres sounded like a kingdom, and old enough to know we could never afford a kingdom anywhere else. It had a small farmhouse with a crooked porch, an apple tree out back, a spring-fed creek, and an old gravel lane that curved through the woods before joining Route 18 about half a mile away. The lane had been there since before either one of us was born. Folks called it Mercer Lane, although technically it had belonged to Cal's father before it belonged to Cal, and then after Cal died in 1994 it belonged to me. It was never a public road. It was never a county road. It was never meant for traffic, school buses, delivery trucks, or people late for work. It was just a little private stretch of gravel that carried us home. Cal loved that lane more than he ever admitted. He used to say, "You can tell whether a man respects his home by the way he drives up to it." I did not understand what he meant until after he was gone. Cal drove slowly on Mercer Lane. He would stop if he saw a turtle. He would slow down for the rabbits. He would get out in winter and scrape ice off the bridge by hand because he did not want anyone sliding into the creek. He treated that road like it was part of the family, and maybe it was. When he died, everybody told me the same thing. "Sell the land, Diane. It is too much for one woman. Move into town. Get yourself a little place with neighbors nearby." But town had never been home to me. Town was where I bought flour and stamps and medicine. Home was the porch where Cal used to sit after supper, the bedroom where I still sometimes woke up expecting to hear him snore, and the lane that twisted through the trees like it had been waiting for us long before we ever got there. So I stayed. I got used to being alone. I painted the porch myself, fixed the kitchen sink with a wrench and a prayer, learned how to run the old mower without taking off a finger, and every Sunday morning I drove down Mercer Lane to church and back, just like Cal and I had done for nearly 20 years. Then, in the spring of 1997, Clay Barlow came to Cedar Ridge. He was not born there. That mattered to people in our county, whether they admitted it or not. Clay had moved down from Richmond with a bank loan, a big smile, and a plan to turn 60 acres behind my property into a new neighborhood called Fox Run Estates. The signs went up first, all white fencing and gold letters, promising country living with modern convenience. Then came the bulldozers, then the dump trucks, then the workers in hard hats, and before long there were rows of houses sitting where cows had been grazing a year earlier. I did not have a problem with that. People have to live somewhere. I was not one of those old folks who thought every new house was a personal insult. I even baked a peach cobbler for the first family that moved in. They were decent people, young couple, little boy named Sammy, both working jobs in town, trying to make a life. The trouble was, Fox Run had one legal access road, a narrow paved road called Barker Hill that wound up behind the development and added nearly 10 minutes to the drive into town. Clay had promised everyone it would be widened once the county approved some funding, but county funding moves slower than an old dog in cold weather, and by that summer the new homeowners had figured out that Mercer Lane cut straight through the woods to Route 18. It saved them 7 or 8 minutes on a good day, maybe more when there was traffic by the feed store. And you know how people are about 7 minutes once they get used to having it. At first, it was just one car. I was out by the mailbox one morning when a shiny green Buick came down the lane from the direction of Fox Run. It moved slow, like the driver knew he probably should not be there, and when I stepped into the road and held up my hand, the woman behind the wheel rolled down her window and said, "Oh, I am sorry, I thought this was the shortcut to Route 18. I told her it was private property. She apologized. She backed up. No harm done. I thought that would be the end of it." Then another car came through 2 days later. Then a pickup truck. Then a man on a motorcycle who came roaring through so fast my dog Brandy ran under the porch and would not come out for an hour. By the end of June, I was finding soda cans in the ditch, tire tracks across the grass, and strangers driving past my kitchen window every morning like I lived beside a highway. I put up a sign, "Private lane, no through traffic." Folks ignored it. I put up another one, "No trespassing. Please use Barker Hill Road." Someone spray-painted over the word private with a black marker. That was when Clay Barlow knocked on my door for the first time. I remember it was hot enough to make the porch boards smell like old pine. He stood there wearing khaki pants and a navy polo shirt with the Fox Run logo stitched over the pocket, holding a folder under one arm. He had a handsome face in the kind of way some men do when they know it works on people. His hair was gray at the temples, but not naturally gray, if you know what I mean. He smiled at me like we were old friends. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "I have been meaning to stop by." I said, "You found the road all right." He chuckled, like I had made a joke he wanted credit for understanding. "I wanted to talk about Mercer Lane. You have probably noticed some of our residents using it." I told him I had. He said, "Well, folks are just trying to get to work, get their kids to school, get home before dark. The current route is inconvenient." I looked at him for a second, then I said, "Inconvenient is not the same thing as mine." His smile stayed on his face, but something behind it changed. "Diane, if we are going to live near each other, we need to think like neighbors. Neighbors do not drive through your yard without asking." He shifted the folder under his arm. "The association believes Mercer Lane may qualify as a community access route." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes laughter is the only thing keeping a person from saying something ugly. "May qualify," I said. "That sounds like a fancy way of saying you do not know." Clay leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I'm trying to solve this peacefully. Then start by using the road you built." That was the first time he looked at me without the smile. He did not raise his voice. Men like Clay do not need to raise their voice until they think it will work. He just nodded slowly and said, "You are making this harder than it has to be." I said, "No, Clay, I'm making it exactly as hard as it has always been. It is a private lane. You do not get to use it." He left after that, but he did not leave it alone. The next week I got a letter from the Fox Run Homeowners Association, stamped with a gold seal and signed by Clay himself. It said my chain gate created an unreasonable obstruction to community travel. It said I was responsible for any inconvenience caused to residents. It said failure to cooperate could result in legal action. I sat at my kitchen table and read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it in half, put it under my coffee mug, and called the county clerk. The woman who answered was named Mabel Sloan. She had worked in that office for 37 years and had a voice like she had been chewing gravel since the Nixon administration. I told her what was happening. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "Honey, you come down here tomorrow morning. Bring every deed you have got." So I did. The county clerk's office was in an old brick building behind the courthouse, where the air always smelled like dust, paper, and something vaguely medicinal. Mabel sat me at a long table and disappeared into a back room. When she came back, she had 3 giant ledger books and a rolled-up map tied with blue string. "Your husband's daddy bought the old Mill Road parcel in 1952, she said. "County abandoned it in 1966, and the title was transferred clean. You own the lane, the bridge, and the strip of land on both sides." I asked her if there was an easement. She looked at me over her glasses. "Not unless somebody wrote one in crayon last night." That was the moment I stopped doubting myself. Before that, I had wondered if maybe Cal had forgotten something. Maybe there was some old agreement nobody had told me about. Maybe I was being difficult without realizing it. But there it was in black ink, right in front of me. Mercer Lane was mine. It had always been mine. Clay Barlow just wanted it because he had sold people the idea that it belonged to everyone. And once I started asking questions, I learned why he was so desperate. Fox Run Estates had been advertised with a brochure showing a clean little road leading directly to Route 18. Not Mercer Lane exactly, but close enough that anyone looking at the drawing would assume the neighborhood had an easy way out. The actual approved plans showed Barker Hill Road as the only legal access. Clay had promised future improvements. The problem was, those improvements cost money. Real money. More money than he wanted to spend. So instead of building the road he had promised, he decided he could pressure me into giving him mine. It was not about 7 minutes. It was about property values, sales contracts, bank payments, and his reputation. My little gravel lane was the shortcut keeping his whole shiny new development from looking like a bad investment. I should tell you, not everyone in Fox Run was cruel. Most of those families had no idea what Clay was doing behind the scenes. They were just trying to get their kids to school on time and avoid the steep hill on Barker Road when it rained. One evening, a woman named Linda Harper came to my porch with a casserole dish in both hands. She had 2 daughters and a tired face, the kind a mother gets when there is never enough money or enough time. She said, "I know this is awkward, but Clay told us the lane was temporary county access. He said you were just upset because people were driving too fast." I told her the truth. Showed her the deed. She stood there quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I am sorry, Diane, I did not know." I believed her. But the next morning 3 cars still came down the lane. That was the hardest part. I did not hate those families. I knew kids had dentist appointments and parents had shifts at the hospital and people needed to get home. But every time I made an exception, Clay treated it like permission. Every time I tried to be decent, he used it as proof that the road was open. He had figured out something I had not yet learned. Kindness without a boundary is just an invitation to be used. By August, the traffic got worse. Somebody cut the chain on my gate. Somebody else drove around it through the grass. One night after a hard rain, a delivery truck got stuck near the creek and chewed up half the bank trying to get out. The driver said Clay had told him it was a public road. I said, "Clay Barlow has told a lot of people a lot of things." The driver looked embarrassed, then said, "Ma'am, I would not have come down here if I knew." I believed him too. I had spent most of my adult life believing people until they gave me a reason not to. By the end of summer, I had enough reasons to fill a church basement. My daughter Rebecca came up from Roanoke one weekend with her husband and my grandson Tyler. Tyler was 6 years old and had the habit of chasing fireflies near the lane after supper. I caught myself watching him every time I heard an engine. One evening, a pickup came flying through so fast it threw dust over the porch rail. Tyler jumped back, and my stomach dropped so hard I had to sit down. Rebecca saw my face. Later that night, after Tyler was asleep, she stood in my kitchen with her arms crossed and said, "Mama, you cannot keep hoping this will fix itself." I said, "I do not know what else to do." She said, "You know exactly what to do. You are just afraid people will call you difficult." That one hurt because it was true. After Cal died, I had become very good at staying quiet. Quiet at the grocery store when people looked at me with pity. Quiet when neighbors offered advice I had not asked for. Quiet when a man at the auto shop tried to charge me twice for a repair because he assumed I would not notice. Quiet was easier than fighting. Quiet let you get through the day, but quiet was not keeping strangers out of my yard. Quiet was not protecting my grandson. Quiet was not bringing Cal back, and it was not honoring what he had built. So I called a lawyer. Her name was Carla Ruiz, and she had an office above the pharmacy in town, with pale green walls and a crooked painting of a sailboat that looked like it had been hanging there since 1973. Carla was younger than me, maybe early 40s, and she had a calm way of listening that made you feel less foolish for being upset. I brought her every letter, every deed, every photograph I had taken of tire tracks, broken chains, trash in the ditch, and damage to the creek bank. She read everything without interrupting. Then she leaned back in her chair and said, "Mrs. Mercer, this is not a misunderstanding, this is pressure." I asked her what I could do. She said, "You document every incident, you serve written notice, you secure the property, and you stop talking to Mr. Barlow without a witness." I said, "What kind of secure are we talking about?" Carla smiled a little. "The legal kind, part 2. The fight. The first thing I did was call Lester Boyd." Lester was 72 years old, had 2 bad knees, 3 ex-wives, and a welding shop behind his house that looked like it had survived a small war. He had known Cal since high school. When I told him what was happening, he did not say much. He just took off his cap, scratched his head, and said, "Well, that Clay Barlow has finally found himself a job he is not qualified for." 2 days later, Lester came out with a trailer full of steel tubing, concrete mix, and enough tools to build a bridge. We put in 2 square steel posts, deep enough that I could have buried a bad memory under each one. Then Lester welded a heavy swing gate between them, not fancy, not pretty, but solid. I painted it dark green to match the trees. We put a sign on it that said private property, no THROUGH access. Emergency vehicles call 911. Lester looked at the sign, wiped his hands on a rag and said, "That ought to be plain enough for anybody with a driver's license." I said, "You are assuming a lot about people with driver's licenses." My nephew Danny worked at Radio Shack in Roanoke, and when Rebecca told him what was going on, he came up one Saturday with 2 old Sony camcorders, a box of VHS tapes, and enough wires to make my kitchen look like a low-budget spy movie. He put one camera in the upstairs window facing the lane and another inside an old Purple Martin house near the gate. He told me he had rigged the lights to come on when a car came near, and that the cameras would catch whatever happened. I did not understand half of what he was saying, but I understood the important part. This time, if Clay Barlow lied, I would have it on tape. Carla sent certified letters to Clay, the Fox Run board, and the development company. The letters stated that Mercer Lane was private property, that no one had permission to use it for routine travel, and that future entry would be treated as trespassing. She also sent copies to the county sheriff's office. I expected Clay to back down after that. I had still not learned the full size of his pride. 3 days later, he drove up in a black Lincoln Town car and stopped outside my gate. He was wearing sunglasses, even though the sky was gray. He got out slowly, like he had rehearsed the whole thing in front of a mirror. I was standing by the mailbox with brandy at my feet. Clay looked at the gate, then at me. "You really spent money on this?" he asked. I said, "Not as much as you spent building houses without a decent road." His jaw tightened. "You think you are being clever?" "No, I think I am being home." He stepped closer. "Diane, people are angry, parents are angry, there are elderly residents up there. You're putting your own stubbornness ahead of the community." I looked over his shoulder at the Fox Run rooftops rising above the trees. "You sold those people a road, you just did not build it." He took off his sunglasses. His eyes were colder than I expected. "You have no idea how much trouble you are creating." "I am beginning to get an idea." He pointed toward the gate. "This will not stand." I said, "It has been standing since yesterday." "That is already better than your promises." He got back in his Lincoln without another word. I watched him drive away, and for the first time I felt afraid. Not frightened of him exactly. Frightened of what happens when you force someone powerful to show you who they really are. 2 nights later, the cameras caught a red pickup stopping at the gate around 11:30. The video was grainy but clear enough. A man got out, cut the padlock, lifted the chain, and drove through. The truck had a Fox Run contractor decal on the door. The next morning, I watched the tape in my living room with Carla and Deputy Harlan Pike from the sheriff's office. Harlan was a decent man, broad-shouldered, slow-talking, with a mustache that seemed to have its own opinion about everything. He watched the tape twice. Then he said, "You know who that is?" I said, "I know who pays him." Harlan nodded. "That may be enough." He did not arrest anybody that day. Real life is not like television. There was paperwork, statements, phone calls, and a lot of people using phrases like "we will look into it," but something had shifted. Clay could no longer call me a confused widow with a chain across a public road. Now there was video. There were letters. There were photographs. There were county records, and people in Fox Run were starting to ask questions. That was when Clay made his next move. He called a homeowners association meeting at the clubhouse, and because I had received an invitation addressed to interested neighbor, I went. Rebecca came with me, so did Carla. I sat in the back row of a room full of folding chairs and nervous people. Clay stood at the front beside a big map on an easel. He looked polished, calm, confident. He told everyone I was blocking emergency access. He said I had installed an unsafe gate. He said I was refusing to cooperate with the community. Then he pointed at a red line on the map and said, "Mercer Lane has always functioned as a connector road." I raised my hand. Clay ignored me. I raised it again. One of the homeowners turned around and whispered, "That is her." Clay finally looked at me. "Mrs. Mercer has had several opportunities to speak with the board privately." I stood up. My knees were shaking, but my voice was not. "I have spoken with the board. I have spoken with Clay. I have spoken with the county clerk, my attorney, the sheriff's office, and just about every person who drives through my gate without permission. So I guess this is what comes after speaking privately." The room went quiet. I held up the deed. "This lane is private property. There is no community easement. There is no county access. There is no emergency designation. Clay knows that because he has been told in writing." Clay tried to interrupt, but Carla stood and said, "Mr. Barlow, perhaps you would like to explain why your development brochures show a direct route to Route 18 while your approved road plans show only Barker Hill Road." You could feel the room change. People were looking at Clay now, not me. One woman in the front row said, "You told us the shortcut was part of the neighborhood plan." Clay turned toward her and gave that same calm smile. "It is part of the long-term plan," Carla said. "Long-term plans are not property rights." Clay's face went red around the neck. He ended the meeting early. Outside in the parking lot, he caught me near my truck. Rebecca was beside me, Carla a few feet away. Clay said, "You just made a mistake." I looked at him and said, "No, Clay, I made a choice. There is a difference." He leaned in close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath. "You are going to regret embarrassing me," I said. "Then maybe do not embarrass yourself." That should have been the moment he stopped. It was not. Over the next few weeks, my mailbox filled with notices, threats of civil action, accusations that my gate created a fire hazard, a letter saying I could be held responsible if someone in Fox Run could not reach the hospital quickly. That one kept me awake. I will be honest about that. I lay in bed thinking about old people, babies, emergencies, ambulances, and whether I was putting my peace above somebody else's safety. But then Carla called the county fire chief, and the chief told us there was already an approved emergency route through Barker Hill, and that no department had ever requested access through my land. Clay was using fear because fear worked. The thing about fear is, once you see it being used against you, it loses some of its shine. Then came the morning with the backhoe. I had gotten a call at 6:15 from Linda Harper, the woman with the casserole dish. Her voice was shaking. She said, "Diane, Clay is out there with machinery. He says they are widening the lane before the open house this weekend." I threw on jeans, grabbed my keys, and went outside. By the time I got to the gate, the backhoe had already knocked down part of Cal's stone wall. Clay stood in the dust with two men from his construction crew, and behind them half a dozen cars from Fox Run were parked along the road. He wanted witnesses. He wanted people to see him taking control. I walked straight toward him. Clay lifted his coffee cup and said, "Morning, Diane, you ought to thank me. I am finally fixing this mess for you." I looked at the broken stones, then at him. "That wall was here before your subdivision." He shrugged. "Progress usually offends somebody," I said. "Progress does not show up before breakfast with a backhoe and a lie." He pulled out a folded paper. "The association has reviewed the situation. We are establishing access for the benefit of the neighborhood. You cannot establish access by saying it out loud. Watch me." That was when Carla's car came up the lane behind me. Behind her came Deputy Harlan Pike, and behind him came Mabel Sloan from the county clerk's office with a rolled-up map tucked under one arm. I had called them the night before after Linda told me Clay was planning something. Clay looked at them, and for the first time that morning his confidence slipped. Mabel did not waste time. She walked up to the backhoe, unrolled the county plat across the hood of Clay's Lincoln, and pointed to a line with one crooked finger. "This is Mercer Parcel 17, she said. "This is the old Mill Lane, this is the property line, and this machine is sitting 12 feet inside Mrs. Mercer's land." Clay said, "That map is outdated." Mabel looked at him like he had just told her the moon was made of ham. "It was recorded in 1966, son. Property does not expire because you do not like where the line is." Clay turned to Deputy Harlan. "This is a civil matter," Harlan said. "It was civil until somebody started tearing down a woman's wall with construction equipment. One of the workers climbed down from the backhoe. He looked nervous. Clay said, 'Get back in there and finish the job.' The worker looked at the deputy, then at the cameras mounted near my gate, then back at Clay. 'You told me this was county property,' he said. Clay hissed, 'Do your job.' The worker shook his head. 'I'm not losing my license over a driveway.' The sound of the engine shutting down was one of the prettiest sounds I had heard in years. No thunder, no gunfire, no big dramatic music, just a machine going quiet because the man giving orders had finally run out of people willing to follow them. Clay stood there with dust on his shoes and his coffee cup in his hand, staring at the half-broken wall like he had never seen it before. Then he did something I will never forget. He walked over to my gate, grabbed the chain, and yanked it hard enough to rattle the steel. "This is not over," he said. I said, "No, Clay, it is just finally on the record." Part 3. The last word. The court hearing took place in January of 1998 on a cold Monday morning when the courthouse windows were fogged from the heat inside, and everybody in town seemed to have found a reason to be there. Clay had filed first, asking the court to force me to open Mercer Lane for what he called community access. Carla filed right back, seeking damages for trespass, destruction of property, harassment, and false representations. I had never been to court for anything in my life. I had paid my bills, raised my daughter, buried my husband, and minded my own business. Sitting there beside Carla, looking across the aisle at Clay in his dark suit with his lawyer and his stack of folders, I felt like a woman who had wandered into somebody else's storm. But then Carla opened her briefcase and started laying out the evidence. First came the deeds, then the county abandonment record, then the Fox Run development plans, then the brochures, then the certified letters Clay had received, then the VHS tapes. The judge watched the footage of the red pickup cutting my gate chain. He watched the contractor drive through my lane. He watched Clay at the homeowners meeting telling people Mercer Lane had always been a connector road. Then he watched the backhoe tearing into Cal's stone wall while Clay stood there drinking coffee. Nobody said a word while that tape played. Clay's lawyer tried to argue that his client believed he had a right to access. Carla looked at the judge and said, "Belief is not ownership, a brochure is not a deed, and calling a woman difficult does not turn her land into a public road." Even now, all these years later, I can still hear that sentence. Clay took the stand. At first he was calm. He said he had acted in the best interests of the Fox Run residents. He said he believed the lane was historically used by the community. He said he had tried to negotiate. Then Carla asked him one question. "Mr. Barlow, when did you first learn that Mercer Lane was privately owned?" He looked at her. She held up a copy of the certified letter sent to him in August. Then another letter from September. Then the county map Mabel had given him after the meeting. Clay swallowed. "I do not recall the exact date," Carla said. "You do not recall receiving 3 notices, a county map, and a letter from an attorney." Clay looked at the judge. "I was dealing with a lot of paperwork at the time." Carla nodded. "Yes, sir, you were, including loan documents that required you to provide legal access to Phase 2 of Fox Run Estates. That was the real reason, the thing I had only suspected until then. Clay had already borrowed money to build the next section of the development. The bank had expected proper access. He had been using Mercer Lane as if it belonged to him because without it, his new lots were harder to sell and his financing looked shaky. He had not been fighting for his community. He had been fighting to save himself. When the judge ruled, he did not shout. Judges do not have to. He said Mercer Lane was private property. He said Clay Barlow and Fox Run had no right to use it for regular travel. He ordered Clay's company to pay for the repair of my stone wall, the damaged creek bank, and legal costs. He also issued an injunction preventing Clay, the association, and their contractors from entering my land without permission. Clay did not look at me when it was over. He gathered his papers slowly, like a man trying to pack up a life he had not expected to lose. Outside the courthouse, a reporter from the Cedar Ridge Gazette asked if I had anything to say. I was tired. I was cold. I wanted to go home, but I looked at the little tape recorder in her hand and said, "People keep calling this a road dispute. It was not. It was a boundary dispute. There is a difference." That quote ended up in the paper the next day. Folks clipped it out and brought it to me at church. One woman wrote it on a recipe card and tucked it into the mail slot at the post office. I still have that card somewhere. Clay stepped down from the Fox Run board a few weeks later. I heard his bank pulled back on the second phase of the development. Some people said he got what he deserved. Others said I had ruined a man's business over a gravel road. I never answered those people. They had not stood in my kitchen at midnight listening to strangers drive past their bedroom window. They had not watched a backhoe tear apart a wall built by someone they loved. They had not been told, over and over again, that their no did not matter. Still, the story did not end as neatly as people like to imagine. The families in Fox Run still had to use Barker Hill Road. The county eventually widened it, but it took time, and winters in Cedar Ridge could be rough. One afternoon, not long after the court ruling, the fire chief came to see me. He stood on my porch with his hat in his hands and said, "Diane, I know what happened to you was wrong, but I need to ask something. Would you consider giving us a key to the gate for true emergencies only? Fire trucks, ambulances, nothing else." I stood there looking out at Mercer Lane, at the gate Lester had welded, at the curve where Cal used to slow down for turtles. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to lock it tighter, put up another sign, and let every person who had ignored me find their own way around. But then I thought about Linda Harper's daughters. I thought about the old couple who lived near the top of Fox Run. I thought about the fact that Clay had lied to those people too. So I told the fire chief, "You can have a key. The fire department gets one. The ambulance service gets one. Clay Barlow does not get one, and neither does that association." The chief nodded. "That is fair." Maybe it was fair. Maybe it was not. I still do not know. A few months later, I was sitting on my porch at sunset when I saw Clay Barlow's Lincoln pull up outside the gate. I had not seen him since court. He got out and stood there for a minute, hands in his pockets, looking older than he had in January. Maybe he was older. Pride can age a person fast. I walked down the porch steps but stopped on my side of the gate. Clay said, "You happy now?" I looked at him for a long time. Then I said, "Happy is not what this was about." He gave a tired little laugh. "You won." I shook my head. "No, Clay, I got to keep what was mine." He looked past me toward the house, the apple tree, the old porch, the lane disappearing into the woods. Then he said, "You could have made a deal." I said, "You could have asked." He stood there another second, then got back in his car and drove away the long way up Barker Hill Road just like everybody else. That was the last time I ever saw him on Mercer Lane. These days, when I think about all of it, I do not think about the court or the newspaper or even the backhoe. I think about how easy it is to lose a piece of yourself one small compromise at a time. First, it is just a shortcut. Then it is just a favor. Then it is just one more person telling you that you should not make a fuss. And before you know it, people are standing in your yard acting like they own the place. Your gate may not be made of steel. It might be your time, your peace, your family, your work, your health, your dignity, or the simple right to say no without explaining yourself until you are exhausted. But everybody has a Mercer Lane somewhere. Everybody has a line they have to decide whether to defend. So tell me what you think. Was I right to lock that gate and fight Clay Barlow all the way to court? Or should I have opened the road for the families in Fox Run, even after their association tried to take it from me? Would you have given the fire department a key, or would you have closed the gate for good? Put your answer in the comments, because I have heard every opinion there is, and after all these years, I still think people can look at the same road and see two completely different things. Share this story with someone who has ever had to draw a hard line close to home, and subscribe for more stories about small towns, big egos, family land, and the moments when ordinary people finally decide they have had enough.